and welcome to Stratcom Talks online webinar. My name is Olga Dragileva. I'm an investigative journalist here in Latvia, and today I'm hosting this discussion dedicated to Russia's strategy in cyberspace. During this webinar, we will explore how Russia is using cyberspace for influence activities and discuss the extent, purposes, and strategic implications of Russia cyber capabilities. Our speakers will firstly present their research findings and then answer questions from me, but also from you, the audience. So please write your questions, ideas, and suggestions for this discussion in the comment section under our live feed, and I will forward these questions to our experts once we start the discussion part of this webinar. So now, without further ado, I would like to present our first speaker, Oskar Jonsson. Oskar Jonsson is the academic director for the Center for the Governance of Change. In the past, he has also been director of the Stockholm Free World Forum, a visiting researcher in UC Berkeley, and a subject matter expert at the Swedish Armed Forces headquarters. Oskar's research focuses on the impact of emerging technologies on modern statecraft and conflict, and in particular, Russian modern warfare. He is the author of The Russian Understanding of War, published by Georgetown University Press. So welcome, Oskar. We are very happy to see you and hear you present your research findings in the seminar. Yes, we can see you. Hello, and please, the floor is yours. We are very eager to hear your take on the matter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olga. I'm very happy to be here, everybody. As Olga said, I am right now running a research center called Center for the Governance of Change, where we're researching new technologies and their impact on the world, basically. And today I will talk to you a little bit about Russian understanding information warfare. I've written a book, and has anyone ever written a book? They always start by saying that they've written a book. But that's not the point of what I'm trying to say. It is that this book basically investigates how the thinking of information warfare, cyber warfare, has changed how Russia thinks about war. And this study goes from the Soviet Union up until today, basically. I go through the work of 140-something Russian military theorists to really get deep into these issues. So what I hope on doing today is not give you all the basics, because we've been basically talking about information and cyber conflict for 6 years, if not longer. So I'm just going to try to briefly paint the meta picture and then focus on what's the most interesting. The book has been received very differently. The commander of US Special Forces putting on his reading list for 2020, but the Russian Foreign Ministry called it a mere brochure on Russian warfare, and they called me a phantasmagorical idiot. And obviously I had to Google what a phantasmagorical idiot was, so I guess that just proves their point. Anyways, let's go to the meta picture. Most of Russian military theorists spoke basically like this. The guy to the left, Mahmoud Garayev, was a leading figure in Russian military theory up until he died in January, 95 years old. And he said something like this: without the use of military force, wars have never been and can never be. Then something happened. All of a sudden, all Russian military theorists started talking something akin like this. The definition of the essence of war must to some extent be reviewed. The threat is connected with information and other subversive action, the creation of controlled chaos, which is also known as color revolutions. Just to give you one more example. The guy to the left, for those who are old enough to remember, is Sergei Ivanov, former head of the National Security Council, former defense minister. And he said, while being defense minister, the development of information technology has resulted in information in itself turning into a certain kind of weapon. It's a weapon that allows us to carry out what would be military actions practically in any theater of war, and importantly, without using military power. And I think this is an apt description if you look at Russian influence operations to the US elections. So this is kind of the meta picture of thinking, okay, something is changing war, and this is very, very much connected with cyber and information means. I'm going to give you something, I think most of you already know that, most of you already think about that, but I'm going to give you some examples, kind of what is driving this development. And some of the examples which I think really understands where Russia is today in modern warfare. Dates already back to the 1996 election. So in 95, Boris Yeltsin was trailing. He was only the 5th most popular candidate in the national election, and the most popular candidate was Shuganov, the communist leader. The key oligarchs got together and they basically said, hey, we tried this communism thing. It didn't go that well for us. Maybe we should throw our weights behind Yeltsin again. So within a short span of time, they published, owning the key media stations, they published a lot of compromising material on Shuganov and support for Yeltsin. And the election swung narrowly. So what was the first thing that Putin did when he came to power? Well, he was actually playing it very, very calm. He wasn't taking any big fights, but the one thing he did was that he took control over media stations of Vladimir Gusinsky, Boris Berezovsky, and drove them out of the country, leading in the end to Berezovsky committing a suicide in very suspicious circumstances. But that's another story. Going back more to the war, the Second Chechen War is also key here. From the first Chechen War, Russia made a really horrible effort in the information domain and lost popular support at home, and the war was vastly unpopular. So they did a lot of things to update their approach until the Second Chechen War in 1999-2000. But all of a sudden, they discovered that the Chechen separatists were using the internet. They outmaneuvered the Russian side by gaining recruits, gaining money, spreading the propaganda of the deed from their attacks on the Russian forces. And it was after that you saw increasingly Russian security services saying statements such as, the internet was created by the CIA, etc. And they were really at a loss on what to do there. Fast forward a little bit. After the war in Georgia, Russian strategists had a discussion, something along the lines of, hey, we managed to get the Georgians to shoot first, but we still lost the global media battle. Why? What are we doing wrong? And they draw the conclusions that Russia's voice is not coming out in international media. So after that, you saw a significant increase of funding for RT. You expanded RT US, RT UK, RT in Arabic, RT in Spanish, RT in French, and realized you needed to be there. And moving up until a little bit more modern times, look at the Arab Spring revolts. Popular wisdom says that Arab Spring revolts was social media created uprisings, that the protesters managed to coordinate themselves using Facebook, Twitter, YouTube to go against the authoritarian leaders. And this, of course, had a spread in Russia. Some of the most significant protests in Russia came 2011, 2012, next to the presidential and parliamentary elections, the Russian Spring. So they realized, okay, well, a lot of how we perceive power legitimacy and how we consume our news today is defined on social media. Okay, we need to do something about this. So what they did was they, the first reported public mentions of the troll factory, as you want to call it, the Internet Research Agency, was on the spring from 2013. Not saying, the West is decadent and they are, run by the Bilderberg or pick your favorite conspiracy theory. But it was all about internal politics. It was against Navalny, and it was promoting Sobyanin for the Moscow mayor election. And it was only after that it went global. And this change in seeing, I think the common thread that I'm going in all of this is that Russian strategists perceive themselves to be losing in all these domains, and after that took actions. And that was seen in Ukraine, for instance, of course, with the very heavy onslaught of disinformation in social media and in traditional media. Fast forwarding a little bit. Okay, what is changing now? Well, I think, and I'm sorry for this not being great to see, but I think the key point you need to look at here is the red and the white one. That's TV and newspaper revenue from ad spend. And all of the ones pointing straight to the sky is social media, search, and online. And this is just another way of showing where the information battle is today. And this is, in aggregate, social media and tech companies' ad revenues are going way past traditional media. And this has a certain number of implications. First of all, traditional newspapers has editors who takes responsibility of the stories and make sure, and they also have publishing responsibility. Today's social media platforms are, by law, not responsible of what they are publishing. They're platforms. They are not seen as newspapers. That's a problem in terms of combating propaganda. The second part of it is that their whole business model, and that's why I showed you the ad spend, is maximizing your time spent on the platform, which means showing you the content you're most likely to appreciate and most likely to get you engaged. But their business model is also about not only showing you ads, it's about successfully impacting your behavior, which means, and this is why the data is used, you generate a massive amount of data to successfully impact your behavior. I mean, I bought a nice sleeping bag because I needed it. And they know that. This is something that Russian strategists have figured out. This is the way modern society functions today. There's an enormous amount of power in the few algorithms by the platforms that shapes how we understand the world. That's the whole ad spend bubble. That's where money and power is today, and impacts and how you understand events. And that's why it's become a platform for conflict today. Okay, I will touch briefly on this because I know Bilyana will talk more about this. But what we saw in the 2016 election was, I've written in a forthcoming paper that it was kind of a basic form of surrogacy. What I mean by surrogacy, it's a way of seeing that you're not the sender. So you're trying to mask that. I mean, you use a VPN or you send it to WikiLeaks to show you're not the sender. I think one of the interesting things on how this is updating now, one of the exposed operation was the investigative journalist collective called Peace Data. Peace Data was not significant in any way themselves. They didn't build up to have a massive following. But the modus operandi was very interesting to understand influence operations today. So they contacted, and it turned out later there was Russia behind it. They contacted investigative journalism and said, "Hey, do you want to write freelance pieces?" And then they said, recruit all your friends into this. So by the freelance journalism recruiting their own friend, it got an air of legitimacy because then you trust the person. If someone you know and trust recruits you to it, so building a more advanced form of surrogacy than just here's an anonymized account sending you information that you hope to publish. And I think this is a natural development of countermeasures that are starting to be taken. So you see Facebook, for instance, posting a lot of takedown of coordinated inauthentic behavior. That's some of these are quite easy to understand by algorithmic analysis. However, an organic cooperative of journalists who seem to know each other, that's a lot harder to stop. Okay, so wrapping up a little bit, one of the things I'm trying to hammer home is that many of the ways Russia has been successful is in parts where they felt that they've been losing and basically just sat down and said, okay, what should we do about this? So global media, very friendly towards Russia. Okay, we need to expand our footprint in global media. Oh, a lot of people are using social media. Okay, we need to increase our influence operations in social media. And this is also how Russia's become seen so successful. And they add a little bit of paranoia, all of the internet the CIA created, they control everything, etc., etc. And I think that skepticism is at least helpful to trying to find ways to impact adversary. The bad news is that the West is quite an open target for this because platforms are forming so much of how we perceive the world today, but there's no editorial oversight and platforms are free of responsibility of posting anything about it. So what do we have to do, we as the collective West? Well, actually, we on the theoretical level, we need to do two things. I mean, first of all, we need to think about deterrence, and second, about fixing our own problems. And when I say our primary problem is not about attribution, so you will hear a lot of people and pundits say, "Hey, oh, it's so hard to know who's doing what in the internet domain and in the cyber domain." Actually, no. We do have a pretty good idea of who's doing what, and you can see that in the Mueller report. You can see that in the U.S. sanctions, down to individual ERU officer sanctioned for exactly what they have done in the different influence campaigns. And particularly if you have an asset within the Russian presidential administration, as the CIA had, you know who's doing what. And this is not that Russia is having some new technology which we never heard of. This is a deterrence problem. So in September 2016, Obama said to Putin, "Hey, I know what you're doing. You better stop this or else." And he had no way. He didn't provide a convincing or else, and that's the deterrence problem. He saw that the wins outweigh the benefits, the costs. Sorry. The second part of it is, fixing our internal problems, and this is the easy thing to say, but hard to do something about. But today we're having, private companies almost with complete lack of oversight, moderating our political debates. I'm not saying that it would be better if governments provided a social media platform, but actually today, there was an immense pressure on Facebook and Twitter to take actions at the US election, and they did so quite reluctantly and not fantastically. The best disinformation is always, true. So it's also hard to say, okay, well, this is false claim, let's take it down, and it costs a massive amount of resources. But I just want to use one example as well. And of course, no amount of foreign disinformation will be bigger than a president spewing disinformation. Just think of the power of the office and the virtue of the platform. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be thinking about foreign actors. Quite the opposite. I think it's an enabling condition. And what I mean, Trump called Montenegro an aggressive country. Who here thinks that Trump knows anything about Montenegro? Could place Montenegro on a map? Who here thinks that any intelligence reports in the US bureaucracy would say, hey, Montenegro is an aggressive country? The only actor that I know who said, Montenegro is an aggressive country is Russia, Russian state actors. And I think this underlines also how vulnerable we are to this disinformation, especially when you have a president taking information from those circles. So anyway, I'm getting a bit lengthy. Looking forward a lot to the discussion. I touched briefly on a lot of points. As I said, I wrote a book, but go pirate it from Library Genesis instead. And if you ever meet me, buy me beer instead. I think that's a fair bargain, because it costs money. Anyway, curious to hear more about from Bilyana now.
Thank you very much. I have here now a lot of additional questions, so I think that we will have very little time to discuss all the aspects of your presentation, but we will try. And before we move to our next speaker, I would like to play you a short recorded interview with our local expert here, Jānis Kažociņš. He is a national security advisor to the president of Latvia, and we also asked him to elaborate on the use of cyber operations by Russia. So here is the interview, and we will continue from there.
Well, I think first of all, it's necessary to understand that Russia feels weak. Russia is a regional military superpower, certainly as far as the Baltic states are concerned, but is not able to take on NATO. And Russia wants to be, or the Kremlin wants to be, a superpower in the way that it was in the pre-fall of the Soviet Union period. And so what they're trying to do through a new generation asymmetric or grey zone methods, or what is called hybrid warfare, is to blur the line between internal disorder, external aggression, and war and peace. And then that way to try to redress the balance in areas in which they feel weak, in which they can exploit the weakness of others. We're looking much more broadly. We're really looking at what could be called cognitive war, not information war. Information war is about facts, about fake news. We're here talking about a change of attitudes, that democracy doesn't matter, that objective truth doesn't matter. What's the point of truth if it doesn't deliver anything for you? And once you feel free to talk and to express lies and there are no consequences, as we've seen even in the most recent elections in the United States, then it's very easy to exploit the new digital platforms which give access to the few to make an impact on the many. So what can we expect in the future? Much more sophisticated ways of splitting the European Union and NATO. That's from Russia, but not only Russia. I think a lot more we should expect from China as well. And the base of it is this battle between democracy and what we consider democratic values and authoritarian systems in which those who are in positions of power can exploit that power. And if we are prepared to allow them to exploit their power, well, then we will lose. If we feel that democratic values are important, then we must be prepared to fight for them.
So here was Jānis Kažociņš, National Security Advisor to the President of Latvia, and some of his points we will discuss later. But now I want to present to you our next speaker, Bilyana Lilly. She manages teams and co-authors reports sponsored by US government agencies, the US military and NATO on cybersecurity, information warfare, disinformation, military mobilization, and machine learning for text analysis. She's the author of the book Russian Foreign Policy Towards Missile Defense, Actors, Motivations and Influence, which contains information from talks Lilly conducted with Russia's Deputy Defense Minister and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Bilyana, welcome to Stratcom Talks, and please, the floor is yours. What is your take on Russia's use of cyber operations?
Thank you, Olga, and hello, everyone. So Oscar already provided an excellent overview of the conceptual and historical foundation of information warfare. And the concept is very helpful because it helps us to understand parts of Russia's foreign policy moves. In my presentation today, I would like to focus on how Russia uses cyber operations in the context of information warfare in practice. And to do so, I will briefly cover 3 main points. First, I will briefly discuss Russia's agencies, the main agencies that conduct cyber operations on behalf of the Russian government. I will then highlight some of the critical components of the concept of information warfare that are relevant to the case study that I will show you. And finally, I will demonstrate how Russia uses cyber operations alongside other activities in the context of information warfare with an actual case, which is the case that Oscar already mentioned, the US 2016 elections and Russian interference during the election process. So what are Russia's main agencies that conduct cyber operations on behalf of the Russian government? We know of 3 of those. First is the GRU, or the main director of the General Staff of the Armed Forces. The GRU is known for its risk-taking organizational culture, and it's also known to conduct military intelligence, sabotage, and reconnaissance. The second well-known agency is the FSB, or the Federal Security Services. They conduct counterintelligence, intelligence domestically as well as overseas, and also focus on combating organized crime. The SVR, or the Foreign Intelligence Service, is the third agency that is primarily focused on foreign intelligence. Regarding the main APTs, or advanced persistent threat actors, that are associated with each of these organizations, one of them is Cozy Bear, also known as APT-29. It was initially believed that the group was under the FSB, but now the analytic community seems to agree that SVR is behind Cozy Bear. Fancy Bear, also known as APT-28, is another very well-known cyber threat actor that's associated with the GRU. And we'll discuss its operations in more detail, especially the hack and leak operation during the 2016 US elections. Another interesting group is Sandworm, and there's a very good book by Andy Greenberg about Sandworm that I recommend. Those organizations are not known to cooperate with each other. They usually compete with each other, and a very good recent study demonstrated how intrusion sets that are associated with one of these agencies tend not to share code with intrusion sets associated with other agencies. In addition to using APTs that typically work for these organizations, Russia is also known to use non-state actors, and they're very helpful because they're likely less costly and they obfuscate attribution. Russia is known to have used patriotic hackers as well as cyber criminal groups. As Oscar already discussed in his presentation, Russia does not use cyber operations in a strategic vacuum. Cyber operations are usually a part of a broader strategy, and they are conducted with a particular objective. And if we want to understand them better, we can place them in Russia's understanding and doctrine of information warfare. Information warfare, Russia uses information warfare for different purposes depending on the targeted country. But in general, information warfare is applied to either destabilize, coerce a particular country into changing its behavior, or to achieve information superiority over an adversary. And there are two elements of the concept here that I want to highlight. Probably a lot of you know about them, but I think it's important to still mention that information warfare, although it is conducted by Russia with the support of Russian state government actors, is not only conducted against decision makers or the military of a particular targeted state. It can be conducted also against a segment of the population or against the entire population of the state. And the second important element here to note is that information warfare is conducted continuously. We can focus, for example, on a cyber operation or a particular disinformation campaign that occurred or was initiated around a particular event, for example, elections in a given Western state. But it is important to note that some of the elements of information warfare, for example, disinformation and strategic messaging operations, can continue after the particular event finishes as well, which is important for policymakers, and especially when we decide what policies could be most effective to in order to tackle disinformation and mitigate the effects of some of Russia's information warfare activities. And another related element here is that when we talk about Russia's interference, for example, again around elections, we could say that Russia may have a preference for one candidate over the other, but there is also a long-term objective. And usually that long-term objective is to try to erode trust in democratic governance and trust in the social framework that exists in our communities. So how does Russia do this in practice? I will use the Russian interference in the US elections in 2016 to demonstrate some of the main elements of Russia's information warfare, and we'll also show you how cyber operations are integrated within the other elements of information warfare. What do we know about this case? Russia's interference in the 2016 US elections is probably one of the most, if not the most well-researched and well-documented case of Russia's information warfare activities. We know from, Oscar already mentioned the Mueller reports, there are also reports by the FBI and the NSA, reports by the Senate Intelligence Committee that are pretty detailed, and other reports that document very well the different aspects of Russia's information warfare campaign during the 2016 elections. Russia conducted good old-fashioned intelligence gathering. It exploited US-based computer infrastructure. It illegally impersonated US citizens. It also conducted a massive social media campaign that included disinformation as well as strategic messaging. We know very well from reports that more than 130 million US citizens might have been reached through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We also know that Russia conducted disinformation operations and strategic messaging for its traditional culprits, namely Russian-sponsored media that is available in the United States, specifically RT and Sputnik. And we also know that Russia conducted Russian state-sponsored APTs conducted a number of cyber operations against all 50 states. They were at least scanning parts of the election infrastructure systems of all 50 states. And some of the most influential and significant attacks were the intrusions of the DNC, or the Democratic National Committee, that afterwards resulted in the release of troves of information about Hillary Clinton's campaigns, personal email, as well as reports that most likely damage the campaign of then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. So to put all those different elements in a little bit a better visualization, here's a framework that I created. I called it CHAOS, and CHAOS stands for Cyber, Hype, and State-Sponsored Media and Associated Operations. These are the different elements or the kind of more or less most notable Russian activities during the 2016 US election interference. And I won't have time. I have 15 minutes only here. I'm happy to answer your questions, but if you're interested in the framework, about a month ago, I published a short article that describes some of the elements of the framework in the Cyberwire, and I encourage you to look at that. So what do we have here? First, we have government activities. Those are activities that were conducted by Russian government agents or were conducted with the heavy support of Russian government agents. Then we have social activities that were conducted with the support of Russian government agents, but were not directly initiated or directly launched or conducted by Russian government agents. For example, here I list a number of rallies that were organized by Russian trolls through social media in the United States. Russian paid bloggers, specifically the ones that worked for the IRA, Oscar already mentioned that organization, didn't participate directly in those rallies, but they organized them using Twitter and Facebook and even sponsored some of them. And I've included those here because some of them were very well attended. Some of them also included very graphic displays. For example, an American woman was paid, she was an actress, and she was paid to dress like Hillary Clinton in a prison uniform. And another American was paid to build a cage in which that woman would be paraded during a protest. In the next section here, I have listed mitigation policies. Those are particularly some of the policies that US government initiated as the Russian operation was unfolding in order to try to change Russia's calculus. Oscar already mentioned Obama's warning to Putin that occurred in September, about 2 months before the elections. And Oscar correctly mentioned that I don't think that Obama really explained what exactly would happen if Putin and Russia continue with their operations. That said, there was a really good detailed report by the Senate Intelligence Committee, where the Senate Intelligence Committee interviewed some of the administration officials that participated in those policies or in initiating those warnings, and they believe that they had an effect, and they believe that they deterred Russia from launching a massive cyber operation or conducting some other activity on an election day, for example. It's really hard to tell at this stage because we're playing with counterfactuals here and we can't be in Putin's head. We can't really know what effect those particular communications and the warnings had. There is a reasonable assumption to be made here. Perhaps they worked, perhaps they didn't, but I would agree with Oscar that a lot more could have been done, particularly at that stage. And here we come to the media coverage. As I already mentioned, there was a massive social media campaign launched by trolls, specifically working for the IRA from St. Petersburg. But in addition to that, Russia also used its state-sponsored media, specifically RT and Sputnik, to proliferate very similar messages that were in line with Russia's strategic objectives. Those messages were critical of Hillary Clinton and very positive towards Donald Trump, and they also contain some disinformation elements. And here I have listed the number of articles per day about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump that were published in Russian media available to the US population during this period. And finally, these are the cyber operations here in the last a little window. And here I have listed only the ones that are the most significant ones, namely the hacks of the DNC or the Democratic National Committee that occurred several months prior to the election. And what is really interesting here is that the hacks afterwards were integrated in the general disinformation strategic messaging campaign because the GRU officers, or specifically Fancy Bear, that infiltrated the DNC servers, subsequently strategically released the information obtained through the DNC hack, through Guccifer 2.0, which was a fake persona controlled by the GRU, through DC Leaks, which was a platform specifically created by the GRU for the proliferation of those documents, and through WikiLeaks. And there's a lot of suspicion and discussion whether WikiLeaks is actually a Russian agent, whether WikiLeaks was aware that it was communicating with the GRU. Most likely it is. We can engage in that discussion. I don't have the data, so I can't really tell you for sure, but there's a lot of speculation one way or the other. I see Oscar is smiling. Probably he has something to say about that as well. And here, here we have the number of articles. The red arrow points to the number of articles that were a part of Russia's media coverage at the time that pertains specifically to the DNC, to the information that was leaked for the DNC hack. So we can basically see the direct integration of information that was obtained through a cyber operation and then was made a part of Russia's strategic messaging and disinformation. What is also interesting here is that that information was spread just before the elections, but also the election day was 8th of November. But also information about the DNC hacks also was proliferated for Russian state-sponsored media after the elections as well. Another interesting thing to note here that is visible on this visualization is that the number of articles per day that were critical of Hillary Clinton and positive towards Donald Trump after election day continued. And this trend is in accordance with Russia's information warfare doctrine that dictates that information warfare is a continuous process. And a long-term objective is not just to choose to swing the voters to choose one candidate over the other, but it is also to continue to amplify social divisions and spread divisive messages in order to erode trust in democratic systems and erode social cohesion in general. And this trend could suggest that, exactly that. So this is what I wanted to share on the 2016 elections. Now, how about the 2020 US elections? There was a lot of information and a lot of speculation and a lot of expectation that the Russians will conduct a similar hack and leak information, or will perhaps somehow hack into election systems and will even manipulate votes. But this time, I think the US government was better prepared. Also, we had a lot more awareness raised among the communities, different communities here, as well as social and media companies. And I tend to agree with Oscar that Twitter, Facebook can do a lot more, that there needs to be some sort of independent audit of those platforms and more of a government oversight. But I also think they still made moves that were valuable to preserving the integrity of our elections, specifically in this year. That said, I think a lot more has to be done. So what do we know about Russia's interference? In July and August of this year, the ODNI, or the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, released two public statements in which it provided an overview of the unclassified literature about particular threats to the 2020 US elections. And in those releases, they were pretty short. Iran, China, and Russia were mentioned as the three nation states that were attempting to interfere actively with the 2020 US elections. However, there wasn't much detail on exactly how Russia was trying to interfere in the elections. Afterwards, we know the FBI director also confirmed that Russia was trying to interfere. And we know from investigative journalistic reports, as well as some private sector reports and studies, for example, a study from Microsoft that was released in the recent, about a month ago, that the GRU, or most likely Fancy Bear, was trying to breach the networks of government agencies as well as political campaigns, similarly to what it did in the wake of the 2016 US elections. But even though perhaps we still will hear about Russia's interference more and more reports will be publicly released in the next few months, based on the available information to date, it is safe to assume and to state that Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2020 US elections were minimal in comparison to Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 elections. On that note, I'll conclude my presentation. And if you found this information valuable, in addition to Oscar's book, mine is coming hopefully next summer. And in that book, I will look at about a dozen cases of Russian cyber operations against election infrastructure. If you're interested, look for it next year. So thank you for your attention. And Olga, back to you.
Bilyana, thank you so much. This was very, very interesting indeed. And we have already some questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to discuss them, but let's try. And one of the first questions, and you briefly touched on that, but I'm interested what both of you would respond to one of our viewers. who is asking about, I will quote it. What do you think is the main goal for Russian disinformation campaigns? And I guess here we can talk about the whole of the whole group of these operations. Is it just a second, I'll find it again. Yes, is it more regional or global role they want to play? Our experts from Latvia here, Jānis Kažotiņš, he mentioned that the general large goal is to reach the status of a superpower. So how would you answer?
I would say it's specific. It depends on the particular case. For example, if we look at Russia's very first operation against a nation state, which was against Estonia in 2007, very first DDoS attacks that were attributed to Russia. In that period, there was also disinformation, piece of disinformation that was spread through Russian media in Estonia, and that was specifically that Estonia has cut the pieces of the bronze soldier that was relocated from the center of Estonia to a cemetery nearby. And that particular piece of information, I'm speculating, but I think a part of the reason why it was spread was very particular, and it was to attract international attention to the problem and to attract the support of the ethnic Russians from Estonia, and also to also try to attract the support of patriotic hackers that were also afterwards summoned to help Russia with some of the DDoS attacks. So that's, for example, is a very particular case. I would say disinformation around elections, specifically in the case of the US elections in 2016, but also the French elections in 2017. I believe some of the disinformation that Russia amplified through its state-sponsored media and through social media was particularly targeted at besmirching the reputation of one candidate, usually the candidate that is anti-Russian. In the case of the US, this was Hillary Clinton. In the case of France, this was Emmanuel Macron, who is now the president of France. And the longer-term objective, as I mentioned in my presentation, I believe, is to try to erode trust in the democratic institutions of the particular country. So that would be my short answer.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think this question kind of always comes up, you know, what is the end goal and what you want? Well, I think the thing of this is really that, well, you know, Russia would, of course, love to run the world. I mean, that's not a very realistic goal, but the steps that would be taken even to less expensive goals are the same. So it's really about, you know, maximizing your position and doing what you can. I think that, you know, one of the best ways in which Russian strategy has been described is by Mike Hoffman, which is fail fast and fail cheap. So it's not, there's always the discussions, you know, are Russians the most clever Russian strategists and Russian, you know, are they the most clever people in the world, or are they stupid idiots? I actually think that's quite irrelevant. What they do is that they try a lot of different things. And if it works, they, you know, they double down. If it doesn't work, they try something different. And I think that this is really, you know, elections is high reward, because elections are in essence a way of settle, you know, it's elections are a way of channeling contention. And it depends on, you know, the losing side accepting the legitimacy of the process. So trying to disrupt the process is high reward. But I'd also want to tie this discussion to what was said on the interview with the advisor to the president, that Russia's weak. Yeah, maybe, but I think that what Russia is Russia's super determined, has some strengths. I mean, it has military and one of the most capable in the world. Don't only look at figures, look at capabilities. It has global intelligence services that are not only doing intelligence as we think doing intelligence, which is trying to be sneaky and find out what's going on, but doing actual subversion. So I think that Russia is, and I'm going to say something which is maybe unpopular, but Russia is not, you know, they're not super weak and they're not super strong. They're somewhere in the middle, and they're super determined, trying a lot of things. And what their goal is, as Bilyana said, you know, in Sweden, it might be promoting peace activists. In the US, it might be promoting alt-right and Black Lives Matters. It's really about, you know, throwing it out there and see what sticks, and then double down. And the key thing is, you know, Western unity is needed to stand up to the Russia threat. So if you can buy Germany with business deals to, or charm France with big chips, then you can splinter that. And that's, I would say, is the common thread towards approach to the West, promoting splintering elements.
Would you say that one of the goals is also to kind of erode the idea of, as Jan Skajotin has said, the idea of truth, an idea that there is some sort of maybe ideological pure activism, and to introduce the idea that, well, everything is paid for, there is someone behind everyone, no one has really true motives, and this shows in maybe Russian domestic policies, the trying to show that, yeah, well, it is maybe that we broadcast propaganda, but the other side also is not truthful. Is that one of the elements?
Yeah, I'll go super briefly on that. No, I think definitely, the cynicism, that's one point of it. And I also think that, and I outlined that a little bit in my book, is, the threat of color revolutions, which is that Russian strategists have seen that an idea that, liberal democracy, market economies, and not, kleptocracies is a viable, it's a viable proposition for countries in the former Soviet Union space. This idea has, led to some of Russia's biggest geopolitical setbacks, and it's ongoing now, exactly that process in Belarus. So what they understood in Russia in the 2000s and the 1990s was very keen on kind of adopting to the Western way of understanding democracy, kind of bought into that idea. But then, as what I said in my speech, a non-sentimental impact assessment. Okay, what are we losing on? Okay, we're losing that people have the idea that democracy is viable. Okay, we need to counter this idea. How do we do that? Well, we launch our own alternatives, sovereign democracy, new conservatism, and we need to undermine the idea of liberal democracy as a valuable proposition. And that's, all the things with liberal democracies, pedophilia and drugs and suicides, etc. And that is quite recent, like early 2000s sometime, 2010s, where that really picked up for us, I would say. Bilyana.
Oscar, I completely agree with everything you said on the point, and especially in the idea that Russia is trying to demonstrate that democracy is not flawless, it's actually a flawed experiment. And I believe that's a major part of their strategy. I also remember an anecdotal example here. When I was starting to study Russia and for the first time turned on RT America, I watched a 1-hour documentary about Texan prisons and how atrocious the conditions were in there and how many people were illegally and unjustly imprisoned and afterwards also killed in the American prison system. And that was my very first exposure to how RT viewed America. And I'm also very proud of the fact that at RAND we have a project on truth decay that is run by Michael Rich and Jennifer Kavanaugh. And it runs exactly along those lines. It shows that there is a reduction of truth in institutions and facts, and more focus on opinion that's along the lines of what Russia is trying to do. And former President Obama a few days ago even mentioned the term. So we're very proud that it's actually picking up.
Thank you. Going back to what we discussed earlier as to the strength of these operations and strength of Russia. So a lot of these cyber operations combined with the information operations, they are found out. We know that they happened. The traces left by hackers are discovered. You, Bilyana, mentioned yourself how GRU is liberal in taking risks. So I wonder if this is a strategy as well, if this is intentional to leave traces so that everyone knows that this is who has done it.
I would say in certain cases, perhaps. But I am more concerned about the cases that we don't hear about because they haven't been discovered. And I would say all analysis and everything that I presented today and everything I'm going to write is always biased because it's focused on analyzing the information that we know about. And I would say even in the cases that we know of, the GRU has has changed its tactics. It's evolving. In the case of the US, for example, we very quickly determined that the jury was behind Lucifer 2.0 and DC leaks and was spreading the information that it obtained for the hack. In the case of the Macron campaign in the French elections in 2017, now we know that the GRU hacked the Macron campaign, but we still don't know for sure who released that information. There was a particular individual that started releasing it on, I believe, archive.org, and the individual had an IP address from a Baltic state, but I don't believe it's still clear whether that individual was a GRU operative or not. So sometimes they would obfuscate their activities. To me, it seems that it was at least someone that was connected to the GRU, given he had the information and released it, but we don't know if it was an actual GRU actor. So sometimes they would really reveal that information. Other times it will be harder for us to track it.
Yeah, just to chip in. Yeah, just to chip in there. No, I think that it's a very valid question to ask, because also there have been cases of, you know, articles that has barely been read, and then it's a report on the on Russian influence operations, and then the spectacle of a Russian information operations might be significantly bigger than what has been done, and that also, you know, it can feed into you know, the political dynamics to it, and just by being there, they can also, you know, impact the legitimacy. I would say maybe. I don't want to rule anything out, but it's also important not to over-intellectualize everything, because, you know, Occam's razor helps you go far by showing, oh, let's see what we can do here. And I just want to underline also what Bilyana said, is that those we know, you know, some of them look super crude, one looks a little bit better, and some looks that the methodology are adopting, but the one where the methodology adopted the best, well, those we probably haven't seen. So yeah, I think, just as I said, they range, they try a lot of things, and some gets exposed, and some are sloppy and some are not.
Okay, thank you. There is one question from one of our viewers that might continue this part, this line of our discussion. I will quote it here. How do both speakers see these problems amplified by artificial intelligence and big data? And how may this ultimately also be a problem for Russia and other actors, as it can be used to help identify influence campaigns? Are we seeing a move towards more state-controlled regional internet bubbles? I guess these are two questions there, but would you care to answer?
I can take a stab at it first. So I think that the most interesting thing of AI and war in general is not about, you know, autonomous drones killing people. I think it's a revolution in intelligence affairs. Just by the way of building up humongous databases and, you know, combining everything with, you know, Cambridge Analytica stuff, psychographics of what's available from open source media, to secret intelligence, to, I mean, take the example, the Office of Personnel Management in the US was hacked and had 20 million personnel files leaked. That was a Chinese hack by all accounts. You know, 20 years ago, it was super hard to make any sense of that, because that would take, you know, 100,000 analysts to go through 200 files each, something like that. My math is not strong. But today, when you sync that with persons, you know, you can buy their commercial data, you can use their open source media, you can use that with intelligence affairs. You know, knowing who to bribe, who to threaten, who to impact, and who to target, I think that is immense. Countermeasures, as I said, you know, finding bot networks and, you know, crude information, you know, influence operations, that's quite easy right now, but the bots have never been that effective, more than just, you know, make topics trending or stuff like that. So I think it would be, I mean, it's a continual race between measures and countermeasures, as any aspects of strategy, but I think it can give Russia a big benefit.
I completely agree, and Oscar provided a really good overview of both sides, the offense and defense. I think on the defense side, several specific examples where AI can help us is, for example, we could start scraping the dark web and automatically analyze it using machine learning content analysis tools to detect, for example, discussions about particular cyber operations, detect them before the cyber operations actually happen. We can conduct sentiment analysis and content analysis of different social media feeds and user feeds in order to understand what the discussions are about and try to again predict certain operations. I was also part of a very interesting research that a colleague of mine here at Shrine and I conducted. We used neural networks to try to detect Russian trolls on Twitter and Reddit using their linguistic characteristics. And our tool performs almost with 100% accuracy and precision and detects them very well. And we actually presented that research to Twitter. So I very much hope they're going to implement it in their frameworks. They told me that they did not have that yet. So this is a way, for example, to directly apply AI to the defense side. But as Oscar said, it's a constant battle between defense and offense. And I still think that offense is losing. Because, for example, a tactic that the Russian government recently has introduced is instead of using Russian trolls or paid bloggers that are located in Russia and are Slavic speakers, they're outsourcing this type of activity and, for example, paying bloggers in Macedonia or African countries to blog on behalf of the Russian government and still get involved in the particular disinformation operations, which makes them a lot harder to detect for a number of reasons.
Thank you so much. I wish we had another hour because I have questions here to fill that time, but maybe we have some minutes left, and I would like to forward to you one more question that refers also to the defense part of this discussion, and not the technological side, but maybe more the ideological side. So. Here I will quote this. Do you have a view on the effectiveness of efforts like Sweden and Latvia to educate and inoculate their general populations against the onslaught of information warfare activities?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, do you want to go first, Bilyana?
I was about to say that specifically media literacy and trying to instill the healthy skepticism among the population with regards to what sources are reputable and legitimate, what information is safe to proliferate and trust, I think should be a part of a multi-layered approach to addressing disinformation. If you look at the whole picture of all the stakeholders that are involved, they also include the Russian government and the highest level of the Russian government, for example, President Putin. And I think media literacy and building resilience in the population should be a part of a campaign that also includes directly addressing the problem with the Russian leadership and trying to design a Whatif framework or framework of deterrence, as Oscar actually pointed out several times that we need one, and try to address this problem with addressing at the same time the different stakeholders that are involved in it. So yes, I think we should continue those efforts for sure.
Yeah, no, I think they're good, but they're I think they're good. They're necessary. They're not sufficient in themselves, and it takes a long time, especially if you're training in the schools. And you know that's the multi-layered approach we're looking at. I think that's one way of building resilience. Another one is exposing them. Not going to shame Russia to stop, but it raises awareness of the problem, which is absolutely critical for policymakers to take effective action at it. And I mean, deterrence. You cannot expect to deter everything. Quite the contrary. You can only expect to deter quite a few things. So you need to draw the famous red lines. But substantial election interference is definitely one of those red lines that needs to be followed. And I think that this is also, just to loop back one thought on how effective is this? Well, one of the reasons why it is effective is because there's been almost a complete lack of cost in doing this, and this goes for the cyber operations as well. Is this an effective way to do? Well, it's like, yeah, what has the cost been? You get a ERU officer sanction, or you get a figurehead in the Russian government sanctions with visa restrictions and travel bans and asset freezes. That's not a significant cost for the Russian government. And if that is it, and you have this, and I think the hack against the DNC, which really dominated the news cycle in October 2016. If you have those payoffs, then of course it's going to continue.
I was hoping for some positive note there so I can end this this talk, but I guess we are running out of time. We have only 1 minute left, and I'm really looking forward to your publications that we can follow and read more about your research. But is there anything that you could say to conclude this conversation and this discussion? Do you have a final message?
Yes, you wanted a positive note, so here is mine. I'm very hopeful and optimistic that because of the change in the U.S. administration and with Joe Biden becoming the president, I very much hope that the issue of disinformation and Russian interference and Chinese interference will become a priority, or at least will be given more funding, more resources, and more attention. And I really hope that all those issues that we discuss here, the establishment of red lines, stricter policies, and clear guidelines on how to react and respond to certain operations by those state actors will start to form, and we'll see a lot more of them. I'm very hopeful about that.
Oscar, anything from you?
In terms of happy messages, I'm sorry, Olga, because you know, all the trends you're seeing is pointing bad. I mean, look at confidence in democracy in the West the last decades. It's just been going south, and I think that you know, there's numbers of drivers to it. But you know, hope is still alive, and we need to do what we can and work hard and be good. I think that the main positive thing for me is that we're starting to understand the critical role of the platforms themselves, and they have, you know, spurred their internal work on it, but also thinking of external legislation and actions that are required for, you know, what is the platform for our democratic debates today. So that should be better, will be better.
Thank you. There was something. All right. Thank you so much for this conversation, and I'm sure I'm really sorry to all the viewers whose questions I could not forward to you, but you have to go back to your work, and we have yes, our time has run out. So thank you once again. Thank you for all your remarks and questions. This goes to our viewers, and at this point, I have to say goodbye to everyone and inform you that our next webinar will take place in a week on December 9th and will be dedicated to China's activities in the Baltic region. So thank you, everyone, and next week, same time, same place, Stratcom Talks will continue. Goodbye.